It's ages since I've given you a full church tour here on the channel, so why don't you come with me and let's explore Gipping Chapel in Suffolk, which I recently visited. It is a place with a connection, as we will see, to a man who was involved, perhaps, in some of the major events in English history, but more on that in a minute. We approach the small chapel from the south, and as you see it is rather unusual on the outside, for the whole of the outside is decorative. Suffolk has no good freestone that could be used to construct churches, and most church buildings in the county are constructed of locally occurring flint, with limestone dressings, the limestone imported. In the late 15th century, the flints were laid in the wall with their napped surfaces flush with the limestone, and the alternating limestone and flint could be laid down decoratively to create various patterns, including the checkerboard and traceried panels we see here. Such work, characteristic of East Anglia, is known as flint flushwork. Let's go inside. Now, you'll probably notice before we came in that there were no graves in the churchyard surrounding this chapel, as this building was never a parish church. It was constructed in the late 15th century as a private chapel to a now long destroyed manor house. Such chapels for the wealthy were quite common in the late Middle Ages, but very few survived the English Reformation, and fewer still were quite as grand as this. Chapels of this sort did not have burial grounds. The people here in Gipping had to be carried 4 miles down the road to Stowmarket to be buried. Gipping Chapel, which has a lovely untouched interior furnished gently in the 18th century, was constructed in the 1470s or 1480s as the private chapel of a man called Sir James Tyrell. Born in 1445, Sir James Tyrell has come down to posterity as a rather infamous character, which may or may not be justified. His father, Sir William Tyrell, had been implicated in a plot against Edward IV and was executed in 1462 on Tower Hill. As his father wasn't attainted, that meant that the 17-year-old James could inherit his father's estate. James fought for Edward IV at the Battle of Tewkesbury in 1471 and was knighted, and a few months later he was taken into the household of Richard, Duke of Gloucester. Tyrell began the construction of this chapel next to his main residence at about that time. When in 1484 the Duke of Gloucester seizes the throne from his nephew Edward V and becomes King Richard III, Tyrell then rises in power. Now, he manages to survive the transition of power from Richard to Henry Tudor, and he lives on until 1502, when he is executed on Tower Hill, just like his father. For he was implicated in the 1501 plot to overthrow Henry VII and replace him with Edward IV's nephew, Edmund de la Pole. And this is where things get interesting, as according to Sir Thomas More, in his History of King Richard III, during his trial, Tyrell confessed to having killed, on Richard III's command, the princes in the Tower, Edward V and his brother Richard, Duke of York. The original source of Tyrell's confession has vanished, if indeed it ever existed, but Sir James Tyrell, the builder of this chapel, has gone down in history as the murderer of the 2 little princes. The glass I'm showing you in the east window of the chancel of the chapel is the original glazing commissioned by Sir James in the 1470s and 1480s. The glass contained inscriptions asking for prayers both for Sir James, his wife Anne Arundel, and his parents Sir William and Dame Margaret Tyrell. In the centre of the window are figures of the Virgin Mary and St John the Evangelist, which once formed part of a crucifixion scene. And between them, you can see them now, these little shields which have the instruments of Christ's passion upon them. The 5 wounds, the crown of thorns, the flails and the nails of the crucifixion. Now the cross of Christ has gone from this scene, but we have this wonderfully tender image of the Virgin Mary, who would have stood at the foot of the cross. She's got tears rolling down her face. And on the other side of the shields of the Passion, we have St John the Evangelist, the beloved disciple, with his hand against his face in utter despair to see the Christ hanging from the cross. The bottom of the window, you've got lots of fragments here, but among them is this inscription recording the patronage of this window by Sir James and Dame Anne, his wife, and lots of fragments of Tyrrell heraldry here too. And what's really wonderful about the glass here at Gipping Chapel is that you can get really close to it too, because the window is so low, so you can really examine the technique of this late 15th century glass painting. Look at some of these wonderful little details here. You've got a sort of little townscape and an eagle probably of St John the Evangelist. Now the glass that Sir James Tyrell commissioned here is the finest glass of the period. Because the glass is so accessible, it is possible to get close to it and look in detail at the glass painter's technique, and I had a fun 20 minutes with my daughter as we looked at the brushwork and stippling. Now glass painting in this period was generally declining in quality, but not here. This glass painter was at the very top of their game. Now popping outside again, let's go and have a look at the north side of the chapel. This is the side that faced towards Sir James Tyrrell's moated manor house, and it is even more elaborately decorated than the south side, with flint flushwork. On this side is a little, well, it's rather a large extension, and this appears to have been some sort of dwelling house. It has a fireplace and a chimney and its own entrance from the west. Perhaps it was used by the Tyrrell's private chaplain. On the north side was once a large window, since blocked, on which is a fine display of carved Tyrrell heraldry, suggesting that the chapel was approached from the house at this point. Such displays of heraldry are designed to be seen, and they were always placed on church buildings where they would be best noticed, and they express the Tyrrell's social connections. On the door into this space is carved an inscription in what is termed black letter text. It reads, in English, "Pray for the soul of Sir James Tyrrell and Dame Anne his wife." Well, if he is the murderer of the princes in the Tower, he certainly needs plenty of prayers, but just through his involvement in affairs of state, he probably needs them too. Politicians always need our prayers. This whole chapel was designed not only for Sir James's own devotional use and that of his household in his lifetime, but as a place where masses might be celebrated for his soul in perpetuity. I woke up this morning to discover not only the first proper frost of the season, but that the channel has now passed the 70,000 subscriber mark. I want to say a big thank you to all of you who subscribe and support the channel. I started the channel a little under 2 years ago, not knowing quite where it would lead, but not expecting it to have the success and the reach that it now does. Over the last year or so, I've been really touched to see such a fantastic community develop here, and I'm grateful for all the many comments in the comments box. I find these encouraging and enriching, and they often change my thinking about the subjects I cover, and sometimes send me off in interesting directions I hadn't explored before. So thank you all very much indeed for being here.